I'm guessing that most of you don't know much about me. You learned a little bit about my background, well, not about my background, but my work on the Planning Commission from Elizabeth. I've spent my career in local government on the staff side. I worked in different cities throughout California and Virginia. I worked in the private sector for about 12 years, working with local governments. So I have a pretty good understanding of how city government works, and that I think has given me a certain perspective on how city government was working here and led to some of my frustration and my decision-making towards this, some say crazy decision, to run for office. I retired in 2008 from the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency. I was director of community development up there. I was in charge of redevelopment of closed military bases in Sacramento County, as well as revitalizing the town of Locke in the Delta. And I worked in sort of, worked with code enforcement and the sheriff's deputies working in some troubled neighborhoods and apartment complexes in Sacramento County. So I had the ability to retire early because I was a public employee. And we had vacationed several times in Costa Rica, and my wife sort of put the arm on me after the first visit and said, you know, can't you retire, you know, in a few years? And wouldn't it be nice to live here? And so we would go back to Costa Rica every year for vacation. We would take Cora with us. And after about the second or third trip, it got more serious that, well, why don't we just move there and give Cora the opportunity to grow up in a different culture, go to high school in a different culture, learn a new language. And so we did. I retired at 56, sold everything we had, moved to Costa Rica, you know, kind of a rash decision on some levels. But it was a rewarding and challenging and frustrating experience, all in all. I'm sure Cora and Marty might give you a different answer. But we intended to stay there a long time. And I think the realization, when you travel to a country is one thing, when you live in a different country, it's totally different. And in Costa Rica, there were a lot of challenges that sort of were underneath the beautiful countryside and the really nice people. And crime was becoming a bigger problem for us. And we had bought a lot. We were going to build a house there. We were going to retire there. And then when Cora started college, we realized, well, do we really want to be 6,000 to 7,000 miles away from her? And so when she went to college, we decided we'd come back. And we had bought a condo in Benicia before we left. So we had a place to come back to. And at the time, it wasn't clear we were going to make Benicia our permanent home. And fortunately, Marty sort of fell in love with it, as did I, as soon as we got here, because I was sort of pushing to move to Oakland or Berkeley. I have friends there. I went to school there. I was familiar with that, but it was just too big, too urban, too dense, too much traffic, all kinds of things that was not attractive to my wife. And I'm smart enough to follow those kinds of leads. And she loved Benicia, and then there was a lot to love about this town. I'd walk everywhere and walk to the library in downtown and the water. So we started looking for a house to buy, and we were a little late to the game, but we were fortunate. We found a place. We redid it. We're in there now permanently, and I think we are pretty much committed to this community. So my main, I don't want to say my main qualifications, but what people know me for is of course, my work on the Planning Commission. And as Elizabeth said, this 3-year process of the crude by rail project was enlightening and frustrating. It was frustrating for me because the way the city staff had structured the whole process, although people were allowed to testify at various times through this process as different iterations of the environmental documents were prepared and distributed, the commission itself was never allowed to ask any questions. So we just sort of sat there mute while people would mainly complain about the project and the EIRs. And we kept saying, well, when can we ask questions? Well, at the end, when it comes up to the final EIR. So that day finally came in February, and several of you, I'm sure, were there, and it was a packed house every night for 4 nights. And the way the staff had structured the agenda, the commission questions came at the beginning of the process, beginning of that hearing. And I felt a little bad because I knew I had a lot of questions to ask. And I had, I'm retired, and I know how to read these sort of technical documents. That was part of my job. And I had the time and the interest, so I had done a lot of research and put a lot of work into preparing this. It was awesome. So I won't, I spent 3.5 hours, and a lot of people got upset by that, maybe not the people in this room, but there were other people there who were waiting to testify, and I, in some people's views, filibustered or, tried to dominate the conversation. Well, I just had a lot of questions, and this was my chance, and I was going to ask them, and I did. And then ultimately, as you all know, the Planning Commission voted 6-0 to deny the application and not to certify the EIR. And that was a pivotal moment, I think, for the community. But of course, Valero appealed that to the City Council. And now it's a different kind of process, or non-process. The council decided on a 3-2 vote that they would go along with Valero's request to postpone action on this appeal until some federal board had a chance to weigh in, or maybe not weigh in. But they were going to write a request to the Surface Transportation Board and ask for an opinion on this indirect preemption thing. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but a lot of you know that this is sort of what the whole thing is hinging on, this argument that because trains are protected from local regulation, Valero should be protected from that same local regulation because they're using a train to bring the oil in. And that is a theory that was propagated by Valero, but very late in the process. And it was sort of picked up by the attorney that the city had hired to advise the council and the commission on this thing. And so we were going against the attorneys, we were going against the staff recommendation, but we did it anyway. But then when it was appealed, the council decided that it was better not to have to make a decision on this, particularly in an election year. And so they put it off until September 20th, at which time they're supposed to come back and discuss it. There's no guarantee that this Surface Transportation Board will have looked at it, will have ruled on it, will have done anything. Even if they do rule on it, it's sort of irrelevant because they're not really a party to this thing and they have no say over it. But it's, in my view, just sort of a tactic to delay the need to make a decision. But what that means also is that if they don't make a decision, it'll be the next city council that will make a decision. And I'm not naive about what Valero is likely to do when they see me in particular on a ballot. They've put $2 million into a PAC already that they're spending on local assembly races and state senate races. And so I think it would be silly and naive to think that they're not going to put a lot of money into their supported candidates or trying to defeat our thing. And there's no question that we're not going to be able to match their money. We're only going to be able to win this if we have a sort of a dedicated grassroots program. And I'm hopeful that this is a start and that this group can be the start of a larger group that will get involved in this. I've agreed to a voluntary spending cap of $30,000. Under that rule, that's a city rule, if you agree to that, then the individual donation limit is doubled to $540. So instead of $270, I can ask for $540. Now, that's a lot of money for a lot of people, and I don't have any, idea that everybody's going to be able to give that kind of money. But I do hope that you can give what you can give. We have to try to get to $30,000. It's going to probably take that much money to run a credible and winning campaign. You've got to pay for not only buttons and flyers and signs, but mailers probably. I'm not completely convinced on the utility of mailers, seeing how much everybody's buried in these things now, and in November it's going to be even worse. But nobody knows who I am either. And so somehow we got to get the word out about not only my background and what I'm interested in doing, but there's, 95% of the community that may be completely oblivious to either this topic or the council race in general. And we're going to be at the very bottom of a very long ballot in November, and we're going to have to just sort of hope that people don't give up, that they're tired of all the candidates and propositions, and we are literally going to be at the bottom of the ballot. So when Elizabeth said that I went to her and said I would run if she would run, that's true, but I was hopeful that frankly that the council would do the right thing and turn this project down, and I wouldn't really have to run, and that would be sort of the end of it. Well, they didn't do that, and a lot of people came up to me through this process and said, how can we vote on this project? We're really upset about this, we're really concerned about it. When are we going to get a chance to vote on it? And the reality is you're not going to get a chance to vote on it, but this is a chance to vote. This is the closest you're going to come to being able to vote for it. And so I would ask, not only for your vote, I would ask you to support Elizabeth as well. She's on the right side of this issue. I want to acknowledge Monica Brown's presence here, who is running for supervisor. Monica is also on the right side of this issue. You need people to walk precincts, but we're going to try to set it up in a way that if you're willing to just sort of walk your own neighborhood with people you know or presumably should know in your neighborhood. Be willing to host a coffee or wine tasting or something in your home and invite your neighbors to that. Wear one of these big buttons. That will people will say, well, who the hell's Steve and why are you wearing the button? And that will start a conversation. Sign up for a yard sign. We can't put them up yet, but we are certainly collecting the names and addresses of people who want them, and we will deliver them and put them up as soon as we are ready, which is as soon as you're allowed. That's in September. The donation table. But in the end, it's going to be us against some pretty large outside money. But it's really a situation where corporations, they can spend money, but they can't vote. And money doesn't vote, people vote. And that's what I'm hopeful that people will do and that we can be successful. So thanks again for coming out, supporting me, supporting Elizabeth, and let's have a good time tonight. Thanks.